we'll.
We're good.
All right. So we just started our recording for our 2022-2023 program year federal grant training. Thanks again, everyone. We've got the agenda up here, and I'm going to move forward to the next slide. Got just a few updates here, and we're not going to, read every single thing off of the slide as we go through. And again, we will send them out to everyone who attends. So we did get, some slight changes to our projections in our awards. We did get a decrease in CDBG, and then we got a slight increase to ESG, an okay increase to home, and then HOPWA increase from the previous year as well. If that impacted your applications, you should have been informed of that. We've got a link here to our income eligibility calculator, and then a few other things, as well as the Salt Lake City map and county assessor website. And then one of the other things that I do want to highlight on this updates here is the SAM.gov website has changed from the DUNS number. So they are now doing what they call the UEI, which is the Unique Entity Identifier, is what that stands for. So if you follow that link there, that'll take you to the web page that kind of goes over how you can update that for your agency. And then if you have not already done so, the other thing is that we will need to get that UEI from any agency that is receiving our funding. So once you have gone through those steps and have received once you've received that, you can upload that as an attachment in Zoom Grants. There are some additional document tabs where you can just kind of upload whatever attachments you want. You could do it there, or you could send it to myself, Ethan, or Amanda. And then if we have any of our internal subrecipients, so that meaning recipients of grant funds that are city divisions or teams, we are doing an additional training for some changes that we are making to our internal processes as far as grant management goes. That will be scheduled in July. Tentatively, we kind of have a hold for July 18th, but we have not sent out an invite and finalized that yet, but that's kind of the tentative date. So if you are an internal recipient, just be on the lookout for that invitation. One last thing before I move on to the next slide that is relatively new. We've got this reminder about the cover sheets. That is a newer requirement from HUD that needs to be submitted with all reimbursement requests. We'll talk about reimbursement requests a little bit later, but that document is uploaded onto the documents tab in Zoom Grants. So you just want to have the supervisor sign that and submit that with all reimbursement requests. It is attesting that all the documentation is accurate. The nice thing about that, though, is that it can replace signing every single timesheet if you're billing for hours, where instead of having the supervisor sign off on every single timesheet for every person, that you can have them sign that cover sheet, and that kind of takes the place of that. So it is a little less work. Moving along, we've got, this is just sort of an overview of our annual timeline. We're always kind of operating a little bit in multiple program years in the federal grant. We're wrapping up things in our current program year. We're looking ahead to the next program year, and pretty soon in the fall, we'll be opening up applications for the 23-24 program year as well. So this is just kind of an overview. We're in the top left at the annual training where it says today. We are currently working on grant agreements. I think everyone has reached out to you all about getting any updates to your budgets that you've made so that we can start working on contracts. And then just a reminder for those of you that are current program year, recipients, that we do have our annual reports for those that you've served that will be due on July 15th. And also a friendly reminder that that is also the date, the last date that you can submit reimbursement requests for the current year. Just remember that all activity needs to be completed by June 30th. So you can bill stuff up to the end of this month, and then you have a couple weeks after that to get those reimbursements submitted.
Dylan?
Yes, Ethan.
Sorry, there's a question with the timesheets, and I'll preface, feel free to type in any questions or raise your hand and we can get to those whenever. You don't have to wait till the end. So Rob asks if you'll still need to submit timesheets. So that will depend on what type of program you're doing. So like Rob, since you're doing staff hours, you would still submit those, yes, but that cover sheet is the only one that you'll need to sign when you submit that reimbursement request. So the employee will not, or you as the manager or director don't need to sign every, like if you upload 60 sheets of hours, you don't need to sign every one. You only need to sign that initial invoice that has the HUD CFR.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Rob. That is good clarification. Yeah, we do still want to see timesheets. It just saves you the signing off on every single one. Gonna go to our next slide. I already kind of mentioned we are currently in step 2, where we're getting back. Some of you have already provided us this information. Some of you are still working on it. But if you applied for $100,000 and you received $50,000, obviously what you put in your application budget is not going to be the same as what ends up in your contract. So you need to make any adjustments. Just a reminder that we do need you can't put in new things. Anything that we're funding needs to have gone through the public that we outlined and has gone through and was scored by the boards and went to the mayor and the council and all of that. So you can kind of tweak the numbers a little bit depending on whether you got more or less, but not adding in new things. And Amanda and Ethan will work with anyone to make sure that everything is eligible, and we're not going over any like admin caps or anything like that. We'll talk a little bit more about some of that stuff later as well. Just want to give a quick overview of our consolidated plan. That is a 5-year plan that is required by HUD for these funds. It outlines our goals and objectives for that 5-year period. And it sort of limits what activities we are able to fund with the money that we receive from the federal government. So I like to think about it as the regulations say, you can do this, and then we submit the con plan, and it says during this 5-year period, we're actually going to focus on these sorts of things. So particularly with CDBG, which is a lot broader than some of the other grants, there are some things that are eligible under the regulations but aren't in our consolidated plan. And so really, we're only able to fund what we outlined for that. Not too long from now, we'll be starting work on writing the next consolidated plan, because it takes quite a while to do that. And I'm sure some of you had worked on the previous feedback, so be on the lookout for that. We will be reaching out to you all. It's a very lengthy process, and we receive a lot of feedback from all of our community partners, drafting our upcoming consolidated plan. You got a little bit of time before we're doing that. And then just down at the bottom, there is a link. For our consolidated plan. You can find the full document there, but those 5 categories up there on the screen are sort of the broad categories of activities that we can work on. And I think now, Ethan, I'm going to kick it over to you to talk a little bit more in detail about our specific grants that we have.
Yeah, so HOPWA and CDBG are the 2 grants that I work with. And out of the 4 federal grants that we receive, I believe they're in the top 4, in my personal opinion. So HOPWA is the housing opportunities for persons with HIV or AIDS. So that one has our broadest target area, as it's the Salt Lake Metro statistical area. So that's Salt Lake County, Tooele County, and Summit County. So if you're receiving HOPWA from us, just know you are eligible to serve clients in those areas. And so HOPWA, all like this one, like CDBG, is under 80% area median income, or AMI. And so with that, each year it goes up. If you're new to receiving federal grants, sent out an email this week or last week with the new numbers from HUD. And so they do go up every year. So just look at that to see if your clients qualify. And if they don't, we get this question a lot, because a lot of agencies might serve clients that are a little higher AMI. All you have to do is just, for our billing, serve the clients that are under 80% AMI. So that doesn't mean that you can't serve clients that, say, have 100% area median income. Just the ones that you bill us for, they have to be under 80% AMI for HOPWA or for CDBG. And so HOPWA, you can do rental assistance. Our HOPWA agencies, I won't get into it too much, because we've had the same three for a while, so you all know what you're doing. CDBG is the really broad one, and we have a couple new CDBG agencies. So CDBG is really flexible. It has two components. It has the housing and neighborhood improvements, and that's housing costs, park improvements, transportation improvements, things like that, what we've done in the past. And then public services, that's typically serving low to moderate income individuals, vulnerable clients, and you can pay for things like salaries, client supplies, program needs, things like that. The difference with CDBG compared to HOPWA is it's tied to Salt Lake City proper. So if, say, someone's in South Salt Lake, Murray, again, you can still serve them. You just can't bill our CDBG services to that client. They have to be within Salt Lake City proper. It has the same area median income limitation, so anyone under 80%. And typically with reimbursement requests, feel free to reach out to me if something's eligible under your scope of work. But again, CDBG has quite a bit of flexibilities as long as that's within your scope of work and what you applied for. So yeah, any questions on those? If not, I'll pass it over to Amanda.
Okay, I will go. We're going to talk about ESG and home. So these are the two grants that I administer. If you have any programs with these two, then I'll be your city representative. So let me know if you have any questions on these ones. ESG is specifically for shelters and to meet the needs of homeless populations, as well as provide essential social services. So this one is a little bit different because it does cover the entire Salt Lake County. So rental assistance and shelter assistance, operation assistance can go throughout the whole county. There are 4 different activities with ESG: homeless prevention, rapid rehousing, emergency shelter, and street outreach that we fund. And so there are slightly different requirements for each one, but most of the time the requirements for participation for participants is currently homeless or under 30% AMI. That is going to be more defined in each contract. So make sure that you are reading your contract, you know what your scope of service is, and that's going to be clearly defined in there. The next one is home, which is specifically for affordable housing, either rental assistance, creation of affordable housing, home ownership assistance, or rehabilitation assistance. Home, just like CDBG, is tied to the incorporated boundaries of Salt Lake City, so that rental assistance has to be within Salt Lake City. And if you are doing rental assistance, all participants must be under 60% AMI, whereas if you're doing any sort of home ownership, rehab, development, that would all be under 80% AMI. And to keep it exciting, we're going to switch off slides. So I'm going to hand it back over to Ethan now.
Yeah, and so with reporting, so we require quarterly reports. So with the program you're starting 7/1, you can start essentially taking billings anytime after 7/1. We won't be able to process them until the contract is recorded. However, you can start serving clients under your federally funded programs through us from 7/1. And with those, so if like say whenever you start serving clients, your Q1 report would be due on October 15th. So that means Q1 would end. We give you about 2 weeks after to collect the data, and that's in Zoom grants. So the biggest things that we're looking for are all the data is cumulative. So every quarter is year to date. So if you serve 50 clients in Q1 and 25 clients in Q2, in Q2 you would put that you've served 75 clients. So everything will add on top of one another. Some of the questions won't be relevant to your program, so it's fine to put NA on the reports. Some of the biggest things that we're looking for are the demographics. Everything that's in Zoom grants that we ask is required by HUD on the report section. So one might say specific to ESG or CDBG. If you have one of the other programs, you can skip that. But if we're asking about demographics, ethnicity, income, those are some of the most important questions, and those are some of the top ones in there. We do require it's number 3 and number 5, demographics and income to match. Those are really your total number of clients that you're serving. So again, that's that 50 in a quarter. So on demographics, that's where you're breaking the individuals you served down by the race of the individual. And so that would equal 50 in this scenario. And then on income, depending on the grant and the income limitations, say with CDBG, up with 80% area median income. Some might be 0 to 30%, some might be up to 50, and some might be below 80. So you just put that, and that would equal 50 as well. One of the other things we really like, this is optional. The Salt Lake City, our department really likes it, and it's possible that if you put any impact stories or success stories, obviously these are things that you would have cleared with clients, or you have a board process for uploading these. But if it's something that's going out in like an agency newsletter that's submitted in a board report, those are really great and we love those. We do forward those on to our resident advisory boards that score these, as well as sometimes the mayor and council will request success stories. And so since really they're the ultimate ones deciding the funding, it's really great to include those, and it really helps distinguish the services that you're doing and like sets your agency apart. So we always love getting those impact stories, so you can upload as an optional report when you submit your quarterly report. Next slide.
So this slide goes over how to calculate your clients served. This is specific to programs where our funding is not the total program budget. So there's an example on here that's pretty simplified. If your total program budget is $1 million and you are getting $30,000 from Salt Lake City, then we would want you to calculate that percent of the program budget and then relay that percent over to the number of clients served. So for this example, that's 3% of the total budget. So if you're serving 1,560 people, 3% of that is 46.8, and you can round up to 47. So that way we have an idea of what our actual funding is going towards and that number of outcomes. So this is specific to the program that is being completed, not your entire agency budget, just so that that is clear as well. And if you do have a program that's serving a lot of individuals or families that are not specific to our funding, we would love it if you put that in the narrative to show how much your program is actually serving. And then within your reporting numbers, clarifying what our funding is actually going towards. Next slide.
So I get ahead of myself on some of the presentations. This is what I was talking about on the reporting with demographics. So some of the other questions that it asks are female head of household. There's some questions about if you're tying individuals to jobs, if you provided overnight shelter. Again, that will vary based on what your program is. It's completely fine if you put 0 in. Again, these are questions that HUD asks. So if you're not, say, an overnight shelter, you don't need to worry about the overnight shelter beds created. However, if you're an employment agency, that's where we would request the responses tied to employment services offered. And then so for eligible service area, again, we're depending on your program, if it's CDBG or home, Salt Lake City specific, if it's home, Salt Lake County, if it's Hopwa, Salt Lake County, Summit County, Tooele County. And then, yeah, we're only really interested in getting the feedback for the eligible area medium income clients. Again, if you're serving, say you have another program that's really successful, like I talked about with the success stories, we always love to see the great work that you're doing, and feel free to submit that. But as far as the quarterly reports, we won't need that information. Next slide.
Ethan, do you want to do this slide as well, since you're the fair housing representative?
Sure. Yeah, so with the Fair Housing Act, so Fair Housing Act touches all the federal grants that we work with, as well as Violence Against Women Act and the Civil Rights Act. So some of the forms that we require you to sign at Salt Lake City, just know those are required forms for us, and we keep those on record. Just a brief overview of some of the protected classes: national origin, color, sex, disability, familial status, religion, race. And then some of the newer ones are sexual orientation and gender identity. Those are now federally protected classes. And then a Utah-specific one is source of income. So what that means is if, say, someone's applying for housing and they only get, say, survivor's benefits, they're a victim of domestic violence, they're a veteran and they get VA benefits, they get Social Security, that means that they can't be discriminated against in housing based on their income. And then we also require you to fill out some of the affirmatively furthering fair housing forms. And so to address racial and ethnic concentrated areas of poverty, high opportunity areas, and then we also ask about services that you're providing in areas of opportunity. So again, if you're providing transit passes, providing employment, education to historically oppressed populations, say like regions of Salt Lake City where there's higher poverty rates, those are things that we're interested in, we track. So yeah, next slide.
So this slide goes over the different files and what should be in each file. This is a pretty basic list. The full list is at the HUD website that's at the bottom of this slide. But basically, with every client file, we want to see intake forms and demographic information like we talked about before. That's going to be information that we want to see on our reports. So that's why it'd be helpful if you pull that information. And then also documentation of income, since that is a requirement for pretty much all of our funding sources and activities. A couple differences with ESG, there are different homelessness status documents that are needed. And then for Hopwa, there is documentation of HIV or AIDS status. So each grant has a little bit different requirements. So if you have questions on those, feel free to reach out to Ethan or I, and we can go over those with you too. If you're doing any sort of rental assistance, then we need to see a lease agreement, making sure that that address on the lease agreement falls into the required boundary, either Salt Lake City or Salt Lake County, or for Hopwa, all of those other counties that it also covers. And then you also need to do an inspection, so habitability, and then also receive a current business license if it is a rental unit within Salt Lake City. If you have questions on current business licenses, you can reach out to us as well, and we can check within the city database to see if there are active business licenses. And then for any housing built before 1978, doing the lead-based paint certification on those. And then overall for your program, we want to make sure that there's policies and procedures, there's an organizational chart of accounts, timesheets, and if you are doing construction, there's a little bit different needs, so Davis-Bacon, Section 3 requirements, things like that. So all of these they're not exhaustive. If you have questions or you want us to look over any of your files, we are happy to do that. And that kind of goes into TA and monitoring as well, which we'll talk about later. But we are more than happy to look over anything that you have questions on when it comes to files or program policies and things like that.
So environmental reviews, there's a couple different environmental review processes for all of you. Just know that we can't do any reimbursements for your agency until the environmental review is done. So Amanda or I will be in touch with you all about your environmental reviews and when those are completed. For the majority of you, you're what's categorized as exempt. You're doing like a public service, you're, a shelter, an employment agency, a medical clinic of some sort, treatment facility. Those are, the building's already built. There's no modifications going on. Those are the faster ones in the HUD system for us to do. They don't really require too much back and forth with HUD or any public engagement. However, if you're doing a housing service, that's where we have to do a more broad one, or if you're doing any sort of construction, like any transportation service. Those are called tiered reviews. And so those can take several weeks, typically, if not more, up to a couple months. So with those, we have to do a notice of public posting. Those have to go in the newspaper for a couple weeks, allow any public comments, and then we have to get authorization to use grant funds notice from HUD. And so just know, like, don't start trying. I mean, you can submit a reimbursement. We just won't be able to process it until those environmental reviews are done. However, if you're doing any sort of construction, housing, transportation, do not start construction at all until we say you're good on the environmental review. And then if you're doing one of those construction-based services, Amanda or I will need to be present for a pre-bid, a pre-construction, and a post-construction meeting. And if you're doing any of those services, like, feel free to reach out to me. I'll be in touch to coordinate those with you. But yeah, if most of you that are doing those services are aware of that, but just please keep us in the loop and remember to schedule us when you're meeting with contractors. Yeah, that's all I've got for environmental reviews.
Okay, and talking about technical assistance and monitoring, always a fun topic. Technical assistance is going to be conducted for any new program, project, or agency within the first 3 months or quarter of this program year. So if you are a new program or project, then just be aware that we will be reaching out. And that's basically just an informal process to make sure that we know what your program is about and give you any helpful tips and best practices on how to complete that project and move forward with that. If you have questions or you would like to request a technical assistance, you can always do that. Whether it seems like a small ask or a really big question, we are here for you all. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. And it is informal, so there's no letter that goes out after that. It is just an email that says, this is what we discussed. And then for monitoring, we are required to monitor agencies with every grant that we have. So if you do get selected, it's not a punishment. It's not saying that you have done anything bad. We just have to pick our favorite agencies to monitor. So if you are chosen, that just know that you're our favorite. And then that is basically decided by a risk analysis. And those are all the things that we go over with our risk analysis. The main thing that we wanted to cover is timeliness requirements. So that has been just something that's been happening over the last couple of years with the influx of dollars that's come into the community. So we want to make sure that you know that there are requirements to spend your funding that we have from HUD, and so that's why we communicate that to you. And that does increase your risk as we complete the risk analysis. So CDBG has pretty strict timeliness requirements, and then some of the other grants have not as strict, but we do have a time frame that we have to spend all of our funding down. So if you are having trouble spending any of your funding, let us know as soon as possible so that we can work with you and potentially change your contract or things like that, so that funding is not at risk both for you and for us. And typically monitoring happens in the early spring. So that is when you'll be notified of that happening. And again, if you have any questions on any of this information, just let us know. But we are always here for any questions that you have when it comes to program and how to run a program.
So VAWA requirements, apologies. So that VAWA stands for the Violence Against Women Act. So in 2016, HUD published a new regulation reauthorizing VAWA, and so it expanded protections to all recipients of federal funding. And so even regardless of what type of agency you are, the clients you serve, that is one of our required forms that we have you fill out. So there's a reasonable, what we call a reasonable request that's tied into the emergency transfer plan. So really what that means is, even if you're not a domestic violence service provider, that if any client comes up to you as a staff person or any of the staff that you supervise and identifies that they've been a victim of domestic violence, assault, stalking, any harassment, that you'll make a reasonable effort to provide them help provide them services at an agency, say like YWCA, South Valley Services, Rape Recovery Center. That could be calling the police, could be calling the sheriff, anything like that, that you just make that reasonable request. And then if possible, that could be help transferring them to that facility, depending on if your agency has vehicles, or arranging with that provider to come and pick them up. So that is something that is required of all of you. So that's one of the required forms. Then there's an emergency transfer request form. That's typically if you're an overnight shelter and someone is sleeping there, living at your facility. And then certification of documents that you'll document incidents of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking. And so this is something that could come up in monitoring. We do take this very seriously. So if we get reports that these instances weren't followed, that you didn't do your duty under federal law to protect victims of domestic violence, that is something that we would look at during your monitoring and issue a finding for.
Okay, and I did just want to mention with VAWA, it was renewed in March of 2022. So I know in the past, landlords may have been a little bit hesitant because it technically expired. So that's no longer the case anymore, and it is fully enforced by the federal government right now. So the reimbursement process, that is all going through Zoom grants. If you've had funding through us before, it's the same process. You applied through Zoom grants, and so you would just go to that same location where your application is, and there's a tab that says reimbursement requests, and then that's where you would submit all of those in Zoom grants. We operate on a reimbursement basis, so once you submit a reimbursement, then we would make sure that everything is eligible that you're requesting, and then approve it, and then you would get paid for that invoice that you send to us. Again, the Salt Lake City cover sheet does have to be a part of that reimbursement request, and that will be sent to you with your contract so that you have a copy of that, and it's easy to just put on those reimbursements. And Ethan and I are looking through those reimbursements to make sure that all the documents there are eligible and that everything that's required is there. So if we have any questions, we will email you and try to get clarity on that before a reimbursement goes forward. And then when it comes to any staff time, we do need to see those timesheets like we talked about earlier, but it doesn't need to be signed physically. The cover sheet does that when you sign it physically. It just has to be approved by the employee. And it does have to be direct hours. So if it's any sort of percentage or time allocation, then we would return that to you, and it would have to change that format for staff time. And if you have questions on that, let us know, and we can kind of direct you on how to do that better. But that's the reimbursement process.
And one thing with reimbursements, it's okay if you say have an invoice that, I don't know, say to Smith's or Target or something, that you have to go buy supplies for your agency if that's something that's in your contract, but you had to purchase, say, something that wasn't in your Salt Lake City contract. It's okay to submit that as part of the reimbursement, as that would typically be your only copy of the invoice. But then you would just like highlight or circle the things that you're billing to the specific grant. So if you're one of our newer agencies, like, we're not going to make you like do 13 different like purchases to buy something. You can do it all in one purchase if you're using, say, like an agency credit card, but you would just highlight, circle the purchases that you're billing to, say, CDBG, Home, ESG, HOPWA, et cetera.
All right, now I'm actually jumping back in on this one because indirect costs are one of my personal favorite things. So Amanda said that you're billing us for direct hours. There are the exception being indirect costs. And just a heads up, if you have a negotiated indirect cost rate, you cannot take the 10% de minimis indirect cost rate. If your agency has that, it's a pretty lengthy process to get that. So we're not really going into a lot of detail about negotiated indirect cost rates. How you calculate those are going to be based off of what was negotiated and what that base rate is and what percentage that is. So that's going to be really agency specific if you have one of those. If you do not have a negotiated cost rate, you can elect to take the 10% de minimis indirect cost rate. You're not required to take that. If you want to put all of your funding to direct costs, you're able to do that. But if you find that it's helpful, you are able to do the 10%. So it is pretty broad as what you can use that a lot. You could pay for accounting staff or utilities. You can pay for, the way to think about it is stuff that supports the program but isn't program specific, right? So if you have multiple programs in your agency, you probably don't have an accountant that only works for that one program, right? You have an accountant that works for your agency that's covering multiple programs, and that is an indirect expense that supports that program indirectly. So it's really broad, and there's no like real concrete, like these things count, like list out there. So if you're curious as to what is eligible, what you can bill to that, reach out to us and we can walk you through and let you know if that'll work or not. I always recommend that folks do whatever's the easiest for you and whatever works the best for your agency. But again, if you're unsure about that, clear it through us. And then I've got this one, and I've got one more slide after this, and we're going to, because there's a lot of confusion around, it says 10%, but it's not 10% of the grant. It is 10% of the modified total direct costs. And that does have some exclusions. So depending on what your program is and what is in your budget and your contract, there might be some things that you are going to need to take out before you calculate that indirect percentage. We've got a definition of the modified total direct cost there. So it's direct salaries and wages and fringe applicable fringe benefits, materials, supplies, services, and travel, and then up to the first 25% of each subaward, which shouldn't really apply to any of you. That would be if you're passing along the funding that you're receiving to another agency, but we typically don't do that with our contracts, so that shouldn't be an issue. But mostly it's, there are certain things that are excluded though, including equipment, capital expenditures, patient care, rental costs, tuition, remissions, scholarships, fellowships, etc. And I have included the full definition down there is at 2 CFR 200.68. That gives it, most of it, what's on the screen is there, but there's a little bit more in that full definition. So I'd recommend you review that before you calculate any indirect costs, so you're sure of what goes in your modified total direct costs. And then on this next slide, I'm going to kind of give an example of how to incorrectly do it, and then an example of how to correctly do it. So again, it's, assuming you had a grant of $50,000 and your only budget line item is salary and fringe benefits for direct staff time, that is within the modified total direct cost. So I just picked that just so it was simplified, so we're not pulling out equipment or something like that. If you were doing that, you would just take that step, pull out the things that are excluded from the modified total direct cost, and then start with that as your base number. So really what this is to highlight is it's not 10% of the grant. So if you're getting 50%, you take 10% off the top, that's 5,000. But the issue is then if you created a budget that way, you'd end up with $45,000 for salaries and fringe and 5,000 for indirect costs. But 5,000 is more than 10% of that 45,000. So that would be incorrect. The correct way to do it is you take that base rate of modified total direct costs, you divide that by 1.1, and then you multiply that number by 0.1, which gets you the 10%. So I kind of break that down right below that. So 50,000 divided by 1.1 gets you 45,454.55 cents. And then you multiply that by 0.1 to get 10% of that, you get $4,545.45. We're not going to do cents in our contracts typically, so I've rounded that down below. So when it's the thing that's capped, you always want to round that down, even if it works out, if it's 60 cents, typically you would round up. But since it's a hard cap, you always want to round the cents down on that. So we have rounded up to $45,455 in the salaries, and then you would be allowed to take your $4,545 in indirect costs. So it's not 10% of the grant, and I know I'm repeating myself, but this is one where there has been a lot of confusion and some pushback from some agencies. So we just want to make sure that we're really clear up front about how to do that, especially since we are currently in that process of creating our contracts and getting your budgets from them. So when you submit that to us, Ethan and Amanda will be reviewing that. And we'll be checking the math on the indirect costs. If it is incorrect, we will just, send it back to you and have you rework it to make sure that we're not going over that percentage. And, just another kind of side note, if you do the 10%, you're not allowed to mix between your grants if you get multiple sources of funding. So you want to make sure you're applying it across the board if you're receiving other funding from other grants or other agencies that are providing you those funds. So hopefully that was clear. That it is a little bit tricky and you don't end up with a very pretty number on that 10%, but this is the correct way to do it. So I'm going to pass it back. I can't remember, who was doing program income?
Me.
Was it Ethan? It was, yeah, it was you.
Yeah.
So passing it back.
So yeah, this won't apply to the majority of you. However, if you're an agency that's receiving CDBG or home and you get program income, if you're utilizing that program income during the program year, know that is something that you're able to do. However, before you spend that funding, you would, or sorry, yes, sorry, getting ahead of myself. Before you spend that funding, you would essentially submit a reimbursement request on Zoom Grants. So the difference is that it won't be a proper reimbursement request. We're just authorizing that the funds are being spent in an eligible way. So with that, you would upload everything that you would submit if it was a reimbursement request. So that would be client documentation, any like qualifiers that you would put up with a reimbursement, such as like property information, assessor information, things like that. And if you have any questions, reach out to Amanda or I. But yeah, if you do get program income, which isn't that many agencies that we have on this call, but several of you do, feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions about that. But we are requiring program income expenses to be authorized prior to those being expended, as that is a HUD requirement. And if you don't know what program income is and you've never heard about it, you can ignore what I just said because you don't have to worry about it. So,
Ethan, do you mind if I just jump in with a couple other quick things? Just a friendly reminder that if you are someone that receives program income, that needs to be spent before you spend your annual entitlement award. So if you receive funding in the year, but you're also bringing in program income, you need to make sure that you spend out your program income completely before you bill us for a reimbursement on your annual award. And then the other thing is there is a section in our quarterly reports where you are required to let us know how much program income you've brought in during a quarter and what that balance is as well. So just making sure that you're reporting on all program income in those quarterly reports as well. I think this is you, Amanda.
Yeah. So this goes over the procurement requirements. The main thing that we want to communicate is that there are procurement requirements if you are doing that with your grant. Typically, that's going to be construction projects. I don't think there's a lot of people on this call that have to follow this right now, but there are 3 different kinds of procurement: the non-competitive, formal, and informal methods. And so those will all be communicated to you before you move forward with any sort of contracting with contractors. So if you have questions about that, or if you feel like you need to follow procurement, then definitely reach out to us. But 2 CFR 200.320 is what we follow when we go through procurement methods. And that does have to be followed before you start any contracting process. So if you are doing any sort of contracting, then just let us know and we can walk you through that. It's similar to Section 3 in Davis-Bacon and environmental reviews, where we have to make sure these things are happening before any funding is spent or a project is started or construction is started.
And with those, that means the sealed bids, that means that you cannot select your own contractor if you're a program that's doing construction under this type of qualification. So it's something that needs to be open to all contractors. So typically that's posting on like KSL, some sort of like public engagement site. So it's in allowing any contractor to bid on your job. Common issues. So these are the things that could impact you throughout the year. So I'll preface, if you're ever running into those, we appreciate you reaching out to us before. We won't like punish you in any way for ever asking us anything. Typically, so for example, like not getting in a report, say October 15th, say it's early October and you have a board report, you have a fundraising event. This happens sometimes. Just email Amanda or I and just say, hey, we're having this event. Could we get it to you like 3-5 days later? Something reasonable. We'll always work with you on that. However, if you don't let us know, that's where we have to document that, and that can affect your risk analysis. And that's what we use to determine who gets monitored. So that risk analysis is a HUD requirement, so we have to keep track of those. But if you keep in touch with us, we're not going to, like, unless it becomes habitual and you're doing it every single quarter, but we're really flexible and we'll work with you if you have a community-wide event coming up or something within your agency. Kind of within that, I talked about demographics and income on the reports. That's usually the most common one. That's typically Amanda or I will just email you or call you and say, hey, these ones don't match. This is your total number of clients served, and that it needs to be cumulative based on each quarter. The reason we need that, it's not that we're being like very particular. That is a HUD requirement because Amanda and I have to input that into the HUD database. And so we do that quarterly, and that's the reason for the quarterly reports. So that's why we do need those numbers to match, because otherwise the HUD system won't let us input those. Documentation. So this is typically tied to reimbursement requests. That's where if you're just submitting an invoice, not supplying any supplemental data, supplemental paperwork, like timesheets, proof of payment, we won't be able to process the payment. Typically, we'll reach out to you. We will reach out to you if we review it, but just know that will slow down your reimbursement if those aren't attached. If you're not able to spend your funding during the program year, we ask that you essentially try to spend all your grant funding in a year. But if you're not able to, that could impact also on the risk analysis that you're not able to, say if you only use 50% of your funds, we would document that for future years. And that's something that the resident advisory boards, the mayor, the council sometimes request as who isn't spending their money. So, like if you're off by a few dollars, a few cents, that's completely fine. But typically we request that you spend all of your federal grant award. And then policies and procedures. So this is your agency's policies and procedures, and this ties to the civil rights information we went over. So we expect those to be up to date, to have proper whistleblower, proper civil rights documentation, client protection, staff protection. So there's always another step up if staff or client has an issue, feels that they're being discriminated against. We will work with you if you don't feel that those are adequate. But if we do monitor you and those are lacking, know that will be a finding.
All right. I think we've only got a couple more minutes, so we'll go kind of quick here. This last page is just some resources. Like I said, we will send this out to everyone who has attended. And we will be also, uploading this this video as well, making that available to people. So, if you do have new staff that come along during the year and you want to get them trained up, you can, show them this wonderful video that we're recording right now. And, they can kind of go over that. And again, also with our open offer for technical assistance, you can always have them reach out to us and we can set some time aside to talk over these things in greater detail as well. So please look at all of these things. One thing I will point out is just another training that we do that we don't have a date for, but it's, kind of late summer, early fall. We do an application training leading into our applications opening up for the next program year. So I highly encourage you to go to that, because that's how we go over all the things that are required in your application, so that you make sure you're completing a good application. And because these funds are very competitive, as you all know, we want to make sure that we're equipping you with the ability to write the best application you can. And then we've got a few next steps. We'll be working on your contracts. We'll send that out to you for signature. So make sure that you review that in detail, because it goes through all of the requirements, both federal as well as city requirements that you are required to follow. And then we'll also be doing the environmental reviews shortly as well. So Ethan and Amanda will be working with you for any information we need on those. We will send out a survey in the near future to let you provide feedback on us, to make sure that we are, you know, doing a good job. We're always looking for opportunities to improve as well, and take feedback very seriously. So let us know how we can be serving you all better and being good partners with your programs. And then the very last slide, it's right at 3 o'clock, is some contact information for all of us. Tony Milner is our director, Heather Royal, deputy director. Beatrice is an office facilitator. Tyler is policy program manager over all of our community development programs. That's me down in the bottom left. And we've got Amanda and Ethan on the right there, as well as Taylor, who works with our NBIP program. She's a good resource if you are working with communities and have any contact with folks that might be small business programs. It's always good to send her there, but she's also a good contact and is familiar with these programs as well. So I think that's it. Since we're out of time, if you have any follow-up questions, please email us. You know, we really appreciate you coming to this training. Ethan, Amanda, do you all want to say anything to close us out?
If you're a new agency, we'll be reaching out to do a technical assistance. That's just us trying to be helpful, go through what will be coming up this year. And if you ever have any questions, please reach out to us. We're available Monday through Friday, and our job is to respond to you. So don't worry about feeling like you're bugging us. That's our job, to work with you and help these programs succeed.
Same.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for your time. Ethan, if you want to end that recording, and then we can let everyone get back to the wonderful work that you do in our community. So thank you so much. We really